when I was old enough to be home alone, but still at that younger age, I lived in a court in a lower-end middle-class neighborhood at the time. It was a small developing town right before the boom of city growth, a place with one grocery store right in the middle of town, so it was a pretty quiet place, where kids would play from sunrise to late in the dark of night with no real worries at all. And to better explain, my court was in a U-shape with about 8 houses in it, really only one way in and out. My friend and I lived across the street from each other, right before the curve rounding the U court. We were both 3 houses away from the exit of it as well. It wasn't a crazy busy street by the exit and entrance of our court. We could play in the main street for hours, and only run into the people who lived in our court driving in. That's how dead the area around us was to the public. No one ever came around, unless to visit our court specifically. No one really had a reason to be driving or walking by our court, because there were better ways to the other homes around us, off the main busy roads. Going past our court is going out of your way to do so. I should also add my friend's parents were not friendly and hated people coming to their house, so we only ever went over to my house or played in our court, which is important for later. It was Halloween, and I decided to stay home and trick-or-treat my neighborhood with my friend. We'll call her Ashley, and she lived across the street. It was late Halloween, and the kids had gone home hours ago. The streets were dead silent, all except for us. My family had left earlier to one of the rich neighborhoods to get some awesome chocolate bars with large king-sized ones. Afterwards, they were going to hang out at a friend's house, then be home late, or spend the night even, wherever the night would happen to take them. I didn't really want to hang out with my younger siblings and their younger friends. I wanted to hang out with Ashley, so I asked to stay home alone. My mom agreed with the promise I would go in and lock the house up as soon as she went in. I agreed. It was close to 10 or 11 at night, so our night went great, and it was dying down, with her waiting for her parents to eventually call her in for bed. Ashley was chilling with me as we sat on the curb in front of my house talking, which, being in that preteen stage, was a pretty common occurrence. Out of the corner of my eye, though, I noticed this middle-aged man walking past the end of our court, looking around as he passed by. He paused when he noticed us. The man slowed down and stared at us for a bit as he walked. No big deal, but I could tell something was off. I can still remember what he looked like, because I remember how odd seeing him there was. We grew up in a small town, where everyone knew everyone, yet somehow, I didn't recognize this man. He was a white average man, with a large beer belly. It was dark, but I could make him out under the streetlights as he casually passed by our court, and I could tell he wasn't a local. Ashley asked if I knew him, as I shook my head. Before we obviously went back to talking. Something about him made her start to keep an eye on the court entrance, though. "Hey, he's walking by again." Ashley would repeat this when she noticed him walk by, again, and again, and again. That guy wasn't dressed for a long walk or jog, wearing a tan jacket, dark blue jeans, and what looked like heavy work boots. I don't imagine going on a planned long walk with those, but we dumb kids ignored those red flags. At least, until about the 5th time. Then, we started to get a little freaked out. "Hey, that guy passed again." Ashley frowned as I turned my back to the entrance of the court as I was talking to her. He wasn't walking anymore. He was casually standing under the streetlight at the entrance of our court, on the same side we were, just staring at us. I remember how awkward he seemed, shoving his hands into his pockets and trying his best to act casual, except for the fact that I could tell he was just staring at me. We got creeped out, as he kept looking around the empty street, quickly, then back at me, before he went walking back past our court. Something inside told me we should leave. Again, he didn't look creepy, he just looked like a typical white suburban dad. But there was something about his eyes. It was just staring at me. I'm creeped out. Let's go inside before he comes back. I remember Ashley breathing before we got up. We tried our best to ignore our fear, since he was gone again. I walked across her street to her home. To add, I was the friend that was like the mom. I always made sure they got home okay before myself. Yes, you can most likely see where this is going. I walked her to her house across the street before I headed home myself. Everything was fine. I quickly ran across the street to my house. Happy to get to freedom, I turned the knob to my front door, quickly trying to get into the safety of my home, when I felt the knob refuse to turn. I remembered holding my breath as I struggled to get the door open. That's when it dawned on me. I didn't have a house key. The door was never locked unless we were inside sleeping, and this was before cell phones. My family had accidentally locked me out, with no way to get a hold of them. I panicked. I was locked outside with that creepy man walking around, and I was scared. I moved away from my front door. I remember trying to calm myself as I decided to go through the backyard and try our sliding glass doors, which again shouldn't be locked. I walked down the path of my front door to walk around the front of my house to the side gate. That was my plan. I remember stopping with fear, and I remember the air being sucked out of me when I noticed the man was stopped in front of the end of our street once again. There was no way he did a full lap around our court to end up back there. He must have just pretended to keep walking. His eyes lit up as he smiled at me when he noticed I was still out. He raised his hand up in a casual hi before he started to walk right towards me. His steps towards me were casual steps, like he was just taking a walk, but he was staring at me. I panicked at his movements towards me and bolted across the street to Ashley's house, abandoning all attempts to break into my own. I remember thinking that Ashley's house is the only one with signs of life, and I needed an adult right then. I remember running as fast as I could, getting up the stone step walkway to the door. I pounded in panic, pushing the doorbell repeatedly. Ashley opened the door, confused by the panicked look on my face. "I'm locked out! Ashley, he's coming!" I remember screaming, trying to push my way towards her, scared shitless. "I have to ask my mom." Those words broke me as she quickly closed the door, most likely not realizing the fate she was leaving me to. I remember crying as the door slammed in my face. In a panic, I turned around trying to see where the man was, how close he had gotten with my back turned. He had resumed walking the court when I assumed the door was open, now only a house and a half length away from me. The second I looked at him with the door closed, he stopped his casual walking with the sidewalk. Instantly, he started to run right towards me. A diagonal, unmistakable through the street beeline towards me. I remember half turning to push the doorbell repeatedly in what felt like a decade of fear. Thankfully, Ashley's door shot open. Her hand grabbed my arm and yanked me inside, slamming the door quickly with a flick of her wrist and locking the lock. I was in tears as she gripped my arm. I remember how desperately we moved to the side windows quickly to see him. I remember how furious he looked at me as he stood just inches from where I once was. He gave me a dirty look, his chest heaving as he slowly stepped back from my friend's porch and back down the walkway. He shoved his hands into his pockets as he turned to face away from us and continued walking out of our court. I don't remember much after that. I remember breaking down crying as Ashley's mom came to my aid, realizing that this was very serious. I remember the cops being called and having my statement taken. I also remember I stayed with Ashley until my parents got home shortly after the cops left. Ashley's dad walked me home and explained everything. I remembered my mom hugging me in panic, kissing me and apologizing that my younger 8-year-old brother must have accidentally locked the door when they left because he was paranoid of the bad guys. I don't remember being home alone after that until we moved years later into a new town. I can still remember this day clearly. I still to this day can't figure out his intentions. Kidnapping? Worse? I still can't find a reason that sits well with me. Even to this day, I get paranoid at night, especially of smiling strangers. I actually have 2 stories I'd like to share, but I'm waiting on permission to share the one that happened to my best friend, which I was also heavily involved in, so I'll start with the one that happened to my own family. Back in 2008, at least I think, I graduated high school, but was still living at my parents' house, along with my younger brother and sister, who were at the time in high school and junior high respectively. It was Halloween Eve, meaning the next day was Halloween, and we were all asleep in our beds. Now I have to tell you that although we lived on a nice-ish street, we lived in a town known for gangs and drug deals, and just random crazy weirdos. It was a little scary to hear gunshots and police sirens in the too close for comfort distance every night, but hey, it was home. Anywho, at about 4 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like a gunshot right on our front porch, followed by shouting and violent pounding at our door. I, being curious, but also scared out of my mind, creeped up to my second-floor window and peered out at the front yard. There was an unobstructed view of the porch. This was all I could see, and aside from hearing a regular stream of cursing and more pounding on the door, I had no clue what was going on for what seemed like hours. In reality, it was probably only about 20 minutes. Finally, and quite startlingly, I might add, my brother came bursting into my room to ask if I was okay. I told him yes, but what in the name of me is going on? Also, if you get that reference, you're streets ahead. He told me this. Some rando was at our front door. He had knocked on, aka tried to break down our door, and my dad heard and went to go see what was happening. He peered through the glass and saw a man on our porch. He asked the man what was wrong, without opening or unlocking the door. The man shouted, "They're after me!" repeatedly, while glancing back behind him. My dad, seeing that there was no one behind him on the dimly lit street, asked if he would like to use our phone. He said yes, so my dad grabbed our house phone and handed it to him through the doorway he had cracked open. The man tried to push his way in, but thankfully my dad stopped him and shut and locked the door. He then proceeded to call the police on the phone that the man had opted not to take. That was the story up to the point where my brother came in to check on me. At that point, the man had started screaming profanities, yanking the door handle back and forth violently, and pounding on the walls. Then, we heard the shatter of glass. The man had taken a chair from our front porch and thrown it right through the front window, which led to my parents' bedroom. I don't quite remember, but I'm pretty sure I was bawling at this point, knowing for sure that he was now in our house. And remember, I woke up to what I thought was a gunshot. I thought about how he was going to kill my parents first, then run up the stairs to kill me and my brother. My mind raced at all the horrible things that could be happening downstairs, when amazingly, the police pulled up right at that very moment. They immediately came into the house and detained the man. Apparently, he had climbed through the window, cutting himself on the glass, and crawled on all fours through my parents' bedroom and the kitchen, finally ending up on our living room floor, where he just laid down and bled out all over our carpet. He didn't have any weapons on him, despite my original theory of him having a gun. I guess I thought in my rudely awoken state that the pounding on the door was a gunshot. He was apprehended before he did anything to anyone in my family, thankfully. We think he was just some druggie who was hallucinating that someone was chasing him. No charges were filed, and we never saw the man again. After the police and ambulance left, my dad cleaned up what he could of the bloody mess, and we all went to bed. Unfortunately, all of us forgot about my little sister, who was in a downstairs bedroom in the back of the house. No one had gone to check on her, and no one told her what had happened after it was all over, so she spent the entire night cowering under her blankets, thinking something could still be happening. Oops. We've all since apologized to her. So, that's my story. Even though it was the most frightening experience of my life thus far, at least something good came out of it. Since he'd bled all over our carpets, our insurance paid for a new one, which we desperately needed. It was actually enough to carpet several rooms, way more than were actually ruined. So, that's a plus, I guess. Halloween is my favorite holiday. Is, not was, despite the events that unfolded one crisp Hallows Eve when I was about 16 years old. At the time, I lived with my parents, younger brother, older stepbrother, and cousin in a big but old house that sat right in the middle of a cul-de-sac close to Main Street. Behind it ran an alleyway flanked by apartments, and it had a huge yard that my basement bedroom looked out on. We lived in a small town. Crime seemed minimal in the area, and I'd made my way out that Halloween night to make the most of the best day of the year. It wasn't just what happened that night, though. It was, of course, what came after, and one small incident that came before. A few days before Halloween, my stepbrother and cousin arrived home to discover a pickup truck full of dudes taking photos of our house. Weird, but when approached, the men seemed very friendly and complimented our Halloween setup as well. It was a pretty great setup, that is true. The men sped off without incident and were quickly forgotten about. My stepbrother and cousin re-entered the story Halloween night, the big event itself, at about 3 a.m. Both had been out drinking with their friends, and as such, both had left their respective vehicles and braved the icy walk home on their own. Cousin arrived home first, but couldn't seem to get his key in the lock, so he just sat on the porch bench and waited for my stepbrother to show up. He did about a half hour later. After having a bit of a laugh at my cousin for being an uncoordinated goober, he went to unlock the door himself, only to find that he couldn't do so. So, they bit the bullet and called my mom, waking her up to let them in. She was, of course, unimpressed to be opening the door for a pair of drunk idiots at this time of night, and didn't buy their story about the wonky lock. They insisted, though, and so, to shut them up, she finally relented and tried her key as well. She too could not get her key into the lock, though. Annoyed, tired, and now confused, she wrote it off as a problem for tomorrow, and the three of them hit their respective hay. One other person arrived home late that night, though. Me. Though I arrived much earlier than those two, and was in bed by about midnight, I woke up close to 1 a.m. Still tired, I could only feel anxiety, and I couldn't figure out why. At first, I tried to tell myself that I'd just gotten a bit too into the holiday spirit and had psyched myself out, but then I noticed a shadow. It was a perfectly man-shaped shadow and cast upon my window. I turned on my bedside lamp, blinked once, and it was gone. It wasn't unusual, mind you, to see the shadows of people harmlessly walking through the alley, and I told myself that's all there was to it. But then there came what happened after. I came home from school the next day. My parents were there, so was a locksmith, and so were the police. My parents were there because, well, that's where we lived. The locksmith was there because my mother had called him, as the confusion of the broken lock persisted. The cops were there because the locksmith and my parents had called them when the locksmith had proceeded to pull the tip of a knife out of our lock. I was relieved to see that's where the knife tip had ended up, though, as they discovered 2 of our window screens had been slashed open, one in our garage, and the one to my bedroom window. From the title, you know this happened in 2001 on Halloween, a Halloween night, to be specific. I was 7 at the time. If you want to know my current age, you can do the math yourself. My mom helped me to remember this one, so if there are any further questions, I'll ask her, as she remembers the night quite vividly. It was freezing that night, probably well within the 20 to 30 degree range. I was hell-bent on going out anyways. I wanted my pillowcase to be stocked full of sweets, damn it. I dressed as a cat that year. Not too hard to imagine that, I suppose. Now at the time, I had zero idea, but my rockstar mom was on it, and you can thank her for her on-par memory. My mom noticed a very tall man, dressed in all black. Mom said he had black jeans on, a black trench coat, and a black hockey mask as well. The man had no kids with him, so that was a huge red flag right away to my mom. He did have a pumpkin basket to put candy in with him though. That night the man followed us around, house to house. He always stayed back 3 or 4 houses, according to my mom. After 20 or so minutes, she shrugged it off, thinking this was just some really tall kid just innocently out trick-or-treating. But the more she began to shrug it off, the more uneasy she felt. I do remember my pillowcase was only about half full, but my mom was hurrying us home. I was being super pouty about it too. I do not, however, remember my mom putting the house on lockdown after we got in the front door. She remembers though, and said she did it very quickly. I ate some candy, brushed my teeth, and hopped into bed. Mom laid down next to me. I remembered this, and I thought it was a little weird, since I had been sleeping on my own at that age. This is where my mom really helped me out with this story, as I had no idea until we talked about it just earlier. Fast forward to the morning. There was a pumpkin basket full of candy with a note on top that said, "Meow," in chicken scratch, right on our front porch, beside the front door. My mom threw out the candy in case it was tampered with, and she burned up the note as well. Now what creeps me out is that in the middle of the night, my mom woke up from my bed to recheck the house. When she looked out the window though, she saw the man, in our front lawn, staring at the house with the basket in his hand. She didn't think that he noticed her at the time. She called the police immediately, of course. She briefed the officer on what happened, and the officer said he'd do a few rounds and patrol the area. My mom never heard back from the officer that night, or ever, she said. She also told me she stayed up the entire night with a pistol in her lap after seeing him standing there in the yard. Since that night, and even up until right now, nothing weird has happened since, but as for the man's intentions, I have zero idea. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I hope you guys are enjoying this sort of daily upload thing. I'm trying to upload as much as possible while I still have the time to, mostly because I find it fun and there's not much else to do while COVID is around, so I hope you guys are enjoying that. If you guys liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. These stories were all submitted to me through my email by subscribers. If you guys would also like to submit stories for me to read in the video, please be sure to take a look in the description below. It will have links to all my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. You can go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to your story as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, so I can make it a nice, healthy, long video. Also, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, the theme of the story if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Also, make sure you use proper grammar and space your paragraphs and all that stuff, because it's kind of hard to read wall of text submissions. If you guys are new to the channel and you like this, I have 2 other channels, one where I do disaster documentaries, and another one where I do true crime videos. I do both of those once a week. You'll find links to those in the description as well. Those are called Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, respectively. Special thanks to my artist. His links to his social media will be in the description below. He does all of my artwork for this channel, and he does the thumbnails as well. If you like his art, so you can check his social media out, and he'll be able to get you something real cool if you're in the mood for that. If you guys are curious about the music, it's listed in the description below in the order which it appears with links to the artists. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.